So what is being implemented? I'm going to run through this quick. A lot of you have seen different pieces of this, but I want to make sure we're all on the same page when we go forward. And so let's talk about what's being implemented. So let's move. And so I mentioned resource groups. We've had committees. And you say, well, what's the difference between a committee and a resource group? You can put it back up, Mark. It's okay. So a committee, as I said earlier, was more about getting a task done, whereas resource groups, and we didn't make this term up. We did a lot of, one of the things the task force did was look a lot of what other association was. And we went across this term resource groups, and we really liked it because it's really providing resources to move the association forward, and as opposed to a committee to do a task. So that's why we liked that term of resource groups, and we came about that. And you see Dr. Banks already picked that up in her terminology. And so we came up, we took a lot of what the association has, and we reformulated it into resource groups. The resource groups are grouped into 3 buckets: markets, technical, and association-wide. And they're that way mainly because of the responsibilities that they do. So let's look at the resource groups for markets. We spent a lot of time in resource groups talking about, well, who do we serve? Again, the vision and mission statement that was approved talks about us serving members and non-members. It also talks us about serving CPAs and non-CPAs. And it also talks about serving the broader population of people that provide services in the accounting profession, which is going to include people that past we probably haven't thought about. Sawana earlier mentioned the CPA evolution, so I contemplated that as we were going forward. So one of the things that the task force recommended to the board is let's designate the markets that the association is going to provide services for. And so on your screen here, you'll see those markets. And some of the markets we already have today, and some of them are new. Some of them, but I think you will recognize that would define generally the accounting profession as we know it today. On the right-hand side of the screen is responsibilities. We want to be very clear to everyone, both the volunteers as well as the staff. What are these resource groups going to be responsible for? And as you can see, it's no longer just about an event. Those events that occurred, they're still here, but it's an and, it's not an or. There's lots more here. And you'll see several things there. If you look down through those responsibilities, we were talking about this yesterday. Mark pointed out that, you know, those responsibilities really align with those strategic initiatives. That was one of the intents of the task force, is to make sure what is going on in these resource groups is furthering the strategy of the association. Tying back to one of the things John said about always thinking about the strategy, that's why the first item here is environmental scan. Each one of the resource groups, I'm talking about markets now, but it's for all the resource groups, is responsible for looking ahead. You're going to understand your market better than anybody else, and looking about what's coming, what trends are coming, what are the things the association needs to be thinking about. And so that's not a one time a year event. That's a constant conversation of the resource group. Professional development, we only eliminated 2, I would call, parts of the other one committees. There were councils that went across. One was PD and the other one was membership, because we put those down into the resource groups. Who best to talk about what training should look like, education, professional development should be, other than people that know that market and be able to provide insight on that. You'll see awareness and advocacy here, again, tying back to that strategic quadrant. But again, who best understands what needs to be communicated through our various markets than the people that are focused on that department, and those same people participating in the advocacy works. You see diversity, equity, and inclusion. Okay, it's good that I followed what Dr. Banks talked about. The task force obviously knew what was going on in the association with that group. So you'll see, we didn't assume anything when we put this together, but you'll see diversity and inclusion is provided for in every aspect that we're talking about, leveraging off the work that you heard Dr. Banks talked about. So you'll see it here in different levels, because we wanted to make sure there was a play for it wherever it was. So staying back to your question about diversity on the committees, it is a responsibility going forward for the resource groups to help ensure the diversity of that resource group. That's one of the responsibilities now of the various resources. Again, you know the people who's best to do this. The last item you see up here is products and services. And that may seem a little strange to you. This is one of the areas that I believe is expanding the resource groups, and is what should the association be doing beyond professional development, beyond advocacy and awareness, to meet the needs of of those markets that we're talking about. Again, public accounting, business industry, all those markets. What do accounting professionals in those market needs? And is it a role for the association to serve those needs? And how can that be done? So when I start out by saying the resource group is more than a committee planning event, hopefully you know what we mean by that. And yes, a lot of those conferences and events we have, they're still here. They're still here. So again, it's an and, it's not an or. So let's go to the technical groups next, Mark. And these look familiar to you. These are all the technical committees we currently have. And you, again, responsibilities. You'll see these responsibilities align to what we just talked about, but they're a little different. In other words, when we're doing an environmental scan for employee benefits, we're going to be, the employee benefits resource group is going to be looking, what are the trends coming down on employee benefits that needs to be worked? Maybe they identify a trend in employee benefits that impacts a particular market. In that particular case, they want to make sure that market resource group knows about that trend coming down. So this group, the groups also be focusing on what type of professional development needs to be delivered by the association. And I loved earlier back to John's comments about lifelong learning. That's really what this is all about. That's what the association is all about. And that's how these resource groups can help ensure that the right type of professional development is provided for the markets. Because this is technical, you'll see respond to technical standards as well as obviously peer review is in here. So we called out peer review separately from that particular item. It does not preclude, by the way, a market resource group from responding to a technical standard. We understand there may be things relevant to your markets, and that's okay. But it's not a main item of the resource group, but it is one of the main focuses of the technical groups to respond on technical standards. And we'll see some differences there. So Mark, let's go to association-wide next. We call this association-wide because it didn't fit in the other two groups. We didn't exactly know what to call it, so we called it association-wide. And you'll see there's some up here that look familiar, and there's some new ones. And so you see advocacy. So what the association does in advocacy is great, and we see a continuation of what's going on in advocacy. Okay, you'll see something called young professionals. You'll go, well, don't we have young CPA professionals? You are right, we do, and this is that group today. Okay, remember the vision and mission is about serving more than CPAs. And so there's a lot of conversation about taking those three letters out here, but we thought it sent a very good message to the inclusiveness of what this group is all about. And so those advocacy and the young professionals, a lot of what we already have, but you see three new up here. You see innovation, emerging trends. You'll see the interim report editorial board and your diversity, equity, inclusion. And again, diversity, equity, inclusion is the group that Dr. Bobby just talked about and Dr. Banks talked about. So interim report is hopefully to help the educators a little bit, being an educator myself, is that if you want to encourage other people to write for a journal, one of the best ways to do it is to have an editorial board, particularly in academia. Academics get credit for writing towards journals that have editorial boards. And so that elevates the statute of the journal. We have a great interim report, and this just makes it better, provides additional resources to help on topics and review and all types of things. And so we're looking forward to establishing that group. Innovation and emerging trends. I saw Jonathan out there. Jonathan, you're the poster child for this, innovation and emerging trends. And you all saw the work that his group did in the last year on technology. So that's sort of what we envisioned with this group. There's clearly going to be innovation coming through the markets and the technical, but there may be innovation trends that really are association-wide. And so they don't really fit into one of those market or technical resource groups. So the decision was when those things arise, there will be a resource group focused on, just like the resources we put together on the information technology you saw in how that works. Let's move on, Mark. Okay, so we also have, in addition to resource groups, we have networking groups. And two of the ones you clearly identify on here, resonate, is the Women's Initiative, and you'll see geography on there as well. So those are already working. I think ultimately, I still believe this, and we talked a lot about this in the task force. I think this is one of the gems. The resource groups are going to be great, and they're going to drive a lot for the association. But I think this is a hidden gem. And this is the outreach effort of the association. Remember, we want to go, you don't have to be a member. Okay, so this is how a lot of people's first interaction with the association may come through a network group. And so we're going to do that through special interests, such as the Women's Initiative, and we're going to do that through geography. You also see some other ones. You'll see students up here. We have a SOAR group right now. So that is the SOAR group. We're calling it students. Up front, you saw a resource group called education. That group included both academics and students. But this is a networking group, particularly for the student side of that. And again, you'll see a couple new. We have a place here for diversity at conclusion. There may be opportunities that are coming up through that resource group where it makes sense to establish a networking group, and we wanted to be able to provide for that. And we came up with a new group called Firm Administrators. And there was a lot of conversation in task force about there is a group out there that's currently being underserved, and is there a way that we can serve them? And so we teed up a network group for that. And the primary responsibilities here is awareness about what's going on related to your area, and also planning and promoting events that go on in that.